So welcome everybody to our September edition of the Cumbria Wildlife Trust podcast. And this month we are covering all things Eycott Hill. Eycott has celebrated its 10th anniversary as one of our nature reserves. And there's such a lot gone on in those 10 years, and it's been such a wonderful example of how we can make changes within the countryside, within Cumbria. So it's really worth celebrating. I'm joined by our Northern Reserves officer, Kevin. How's it going, Kevin?
Very well, thank you, Joe. Greetings to everyone out there, and welcome to a podcast about Eycott Hill.
You've been involved in Eycott for a long, long time. So give us a bit of a potted history of Eycott.
So Eycott Hill is a nature reserve that is just inside the boundary of the National Park in the Lake District. It's about 220 hectares, so around about 400 and something acres. So when we acquired it, it was one of the largest acquisitions we'd made for a very, very long time, and was one of our biggest nature reserves. It's designated as a site of special scientific interest because of its nationally important geology, and then its natural history interests are in the swamps and mires, so wetlands, which are absolutely sort of chock full of the most wonderful species.
It's partly the geology, isn't it, that actually makes it so special, because the geology, the Eycott volcanics, of which Eycott Hill is the type location, they produce this incredible kind of topography, don't they? And that topography is what governs these wonderful mires, the like of which I haven't really seen anywhere else in Cumbria in my 30 years of working in conservation.
Absolutely. I would say they're the best wetlands in Cumbria. And the geology is quite extraordinary. As you say, the lava flows were started to be laid down in the Ordovician period about 460 million years ago. And the oldest lava that was laid down is very unusual in that it carries a lot of very large crystals. But there are other geologies as well. So on the western side of the reserve, it becomes skid or slate. And on the eastern side of the reserve, it's Carboniferous limestone.
Give us a bit of an idea then about how we got the site originally.
The site came up for sale, and fortunately one of our staff lived in the local village and overheard a conversation, I think. So we became aware that it was for sale. At the same time, we were trying to buy another piece of land at auction, which we ended up failing to buy. But we had arranged a loan with Esme Fairbairn Foundation for that purchase. And so we were able to ask them to kind of transfer the loan should we be able to buy Eycott Hill. So that was the beginnings of it. It was owned by a farmer. It was heavily grazed by sheep. There were upwards, 800 to 1,000 sheep, perhaps more out there at times. So when we acquired it, it basically was what I refer to semi-jokingly as Mamba country, which stands for miles and miles of bugger all. Because there were, it was a treeless landscape, really apart from the swamps and mires at Eycott Hill. There was very little natural history interest there because in common with the rest of our uplands, dwarf shrub heath and all the scrub and trees had been grazed out. So it was kind of, by and large, an ecological desert of species poor acid grassland.
So, like you say, it was one of our biggest reserves, one of our biggest acquisitions for a long time, and it was really our first upland project, wasn't it? So give us a bit of an idea then, because there was a hell of a lot of work, because we had a Heritage Lottery Fund money as well, didn't we, which was brilliant, and we could employ 2 people just to concentrate on the nature reserve, which is just great. We should have that for every nature reserve. Give us a bit of a flavour then as to what went on in that initial period.
Yeah, so as you say, we were able to employ 2 people because of the National Heritage Lottery Fund grant. One as a sort of events and communications person, and the other as a nature reserve manager. I mean, Eycott Hill went from a little known place that only really locals knew about and went for walks there, and now we're sort of, when we had a people counter on the gate, we reckoned that we were getting around about 7,000 people a year, which for any of our nature reserves is a big, big number.
And then what about the habitat management?
We made a plan for the site in terms of We were going to restore some of the grasslands to species-rich hay meadows. We were going to create sort of areas of woodland or trees and scrub. So all of that required sort of fencing and, that sort of infrastructure. We planted about 10,000 trees. We started blocking ditches. We didn't graze it for the first year, so that was to kind of see what came through growth-wise in terms of vegetation. Vegetation grew. We saw initially, for example, we saw mountain pansy. Now it's all over the reserve. Things like wood anemone. The heath vegetation has come back, as you've touched on. It really has come back extraordinarily well. And all of that has been achieved simply by changing from intensive sheep to extensive native cattle.
That's made a hell of a difference. And we're going to hear about that now from Jack Dryden, who's our Assistant Northern Reserves Officer. So Liz has been out onto the reserve with Jack and with one of our fantastic cattle checker volunteers, Anne, who look after and keep an eye on all those beautiful belted Galloways as they graze the site. And let's have a listen to what Jack and Anne have got to say.
Well, this morning I'm on Eycott Hill and I'm joining two Eycott Hill experts. The first is Jack Dryden and the other is volunteer Anne Burton, who's been volunteering at Eycott for 10 years, which is as long as we've had the reserve. So good morning. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you do?
So I'm Jack, and I work on the Northern Reserves, of which there's about 14, and Eycott's one of my favourites.
And Anne?
I've been volunteering here for pretty well 10 years. We moved up to the lakes. I came out here on a winter day, winter bleached grass, snow on the fells, and thought, yeah, I can volunteer here. So I signed on the dotted line and had an email early 2016, do you fancy livestock checking? Oh, I thought, that'll be a good one. Let's do it. And I have done ever since.
We can see them at the distance now. We'll be going quite a lot closer. And it'd be really interesting to hear the role they play on Eycott. So, would you like to show me around?
Yeah, we'll go for a wander.
Yeah, so we just come down from the car park and we've come across the meadows.
Yeah. In terms of the lifespan of a meadow, they're still really young. Some of them will be about 9 years old, some of them about 8. So they were restored shortly after we acquired the reserve 10 years ago. And they're brilliant. Like they're an instant sort of hit in terms of restoration. Visually, they're lovely. And in terms of where we've got with them so far, obviously we did the initial restoration work, which involved a lot of power harrow in the ground, getting green hay from other sites, other wildflower meadows. I think you've only got a certain window for it to be successful, so that was brought up here at a rapid rate. Put on the prepared ground, you then get a roller to go over it to get sort of good contact, with the seeds and the soil for germination. And then after that, it's sort of a waiting game. But within the first year, I think there was instant results. Gets cut each year, once a year, which is quite important because it allows wildlife to use it. It's not getting cut 3 or 4 times, just the once. So ground nesting birds, invertebrates get to use it. The flowers get to go through the full growth cycle and set seed. So we get roughly 18 to 20 species per square metre.
Oh, that's high, isn't it?
It's pretty high, especially for 10 years. I think real pristine meadows, it's about 30 is the number you're looking to get to reach that nirvana in wildflower meadows.
Yeah, so Jack, we've just come down into a sort of dip in the hillside and come across some of the stars of Eycott Hill, haven't we? The belted Galloways. So tell me a bit about why the belted Galloways are so important here and how they've actually revolutionised things.
So they're our main management tool. Here, when we first got the site, I believe historically it had been heavily grazed by sheep. So the first year it was just let's get everything off and see what comes up, what's growing, just so we have an idea of how we might want to graze it. And I think early on the idea was native cattle, because they are what has been bred by farmers over the years to farm this land, and they're what's suited to it. And obviously these are belted Galloways, so they're very sort of close to where we're at in Cumbria. Galloway's just over the Solway.
Yeah.
So yeah, we switched from a site that had historically been sheep grazed to cattle.
Just tell me why sheep are quite so detrimental to biodiversity.
We're at risk of sort of, when we talk about sheep farming, potentially bashing sheep farmers, which is the last thing I'd want to do, because it's a way of life, it's a historic thing, it's how they've earned a living. But from my perspective, I look at the landscape that we can see now, and it's sort of a landscape of ghosts, really. There's nothing wild about it, and the reason it isn't is because of clearance of trees to make it viable for hill farming and grazing with sheep. So we're just sort of trying to undo that gradually here at Eycott through grazing with cattle.
They're bigger animals. It's kind of counterintuitive in a way, isn't it?
I mean, they graze differently in that sheep will come along and they're quite selective and they're nibblers, so they nibble all of the flowers first, all the tasty stuff. So the flowers never get to grow and set seed. Cows are a bit less selective and they sort of graze with the tongues, like they wrap the tongues around the vegetation and yank it out and nibble away. So, I mean, like for instance, heather usually suffers quite a lot in the lakes from being overgrazed by sheep, particularly in winter when all the goodness goes out of the grass and the flora. They move on to the woody stuff, so heather can get quite heavily suppressed. Here the cows have the opposite effect in these sort of clear patches of vegetation. So if they're eating around a patch of heather that's historically been suppressed, they're creating pockets for that heather to then set seed into and expand. So heather is one thing that's benefited from that change in grazing.
Yeah. And Anne, the belted Galloways are your bag, aren't they?
Oh, they are. They are. The Belties came in, to say, June 2019. They were cows with calves at heel, and the calves that came onto the reserve then are now second, third year mums themselves. They're here all year. They don't go home. The only time they go back to the home farm is if an animal is ill or is injured or its calf isn't thriving. Belted Galloways were bred with the white belt round them so they could be easily seen.
Oh, really? I wondered why they had the white belt.
Specially bred so you could be found, which is fine if where we're sitting now we're looking back towards the village of Berrier. If they're somewhere like that, you have no trouble finding them. But Eycott consists of north-south marshy areas interspersed by rocky, grassy areas, and that in itself is very undulating, and you can lose an entire herd. There are 56 of them, no trouble at all. So finding them is the first thing. With calving, we've learnt to know what to look for with the cow that's coming up to calving, so you're watching carefully, is she managing? If not, you contact the farm. It hasn't happened, they've all calved very, very well, no problem at all. We've got 22 now.
22 calves this year?
Yes.
That's amazing.
But you find them, you check them. Are they well? Ears at 2:45, bright eyes, wet nose, looking alert. If they're lying down, are they lying comfortably? Are they cudding the calves? Are they sucking? It's difficult to explain really what you're looking for. It's one of those things you gain over time, and you can think, she doesn't look right, or yes, they're absolutely fine.
So how many times do you have to do this?
So somebody is out here every day, whatever, I say, come hell or high water, probably both, right through the year.
And so when you're checking them, do you have to count
Yes.
all of them? You have to account for every one?
Yes. And
That must take a long time.
It can take a long time, particularly, say, for now, as I realise they're well scattered. And if we look over here to behind you, there's a couple of calves lying down, and they can be notoriously difficult to see. You can just see a pair of black ears out of the marsh. So you do have to go and visit each group wherever they are to check you have got all 56.
So yeah, the cattle checkers, I have to say, are the most determined volunteers we might have. So they're like really dedicated volunteers, and I think we'd struggle to manage the reserve without them.
But as a rule, it's with the eyes and ears, so it really does matter that we're out and about doing our stuff.
We're really doing it in partnership, aren't we, with the farmer?
Yeah, I think that's something we're trying to showcase in that we've switched to cattle. It's lower intensity. The cattle are here year round, so the farmer doesn't have to worry about overwintering them, growing on feed for them, using fertiliser to grow on enough feed for them, and also thanks to the volunteers and the way that he's sort of switched the way he farms, he can have a bit more of a life, I'd imagine, because he doesn't have to dedicate as much time to coming and being on top of them all the time and doing all the other things to make sure that, they're healthy through winter. And obviously, from our perspective, it's slightly more nature friendly as well.
Yeah, so Jack, it's sounding as though you don't do any work at all. You just let the cattle get on with it and the cattle checkers check the cattle. Yeah. But that's not true. No. So show me what you were doing last winter.
Yeah, we've come to a patch of heather in which last winter we planted juniper. And we planted 1,200 juniper trees. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it was quite a big undertaking actually, because for each juniper tree you plant, you've got to strip off, about 1 foot by 1 foot of turf, and then plant the tree inside of that hollow that we make. And that's to give the juniper a chance to root and outcompete the vegetation, which you can see quite quickly happens, because the juniper, it's quite slow growing, especially in these conditions where, we're at about sort of 300 metres here. But it is an upland sort of shrubby tree species, and it's absolutely brilliant for a number of reasons. At this altitude it grows out as much as it grows up, so it forms quite thick cover for bird species. So within 10 years you might have birds coming and nesting in them. They're also really unpalatable because they're spiky and they don't taste very nice. So they do really well in that they don't get grazed or browsed by mammals passing through, which is brilliant. And over time they will go on to be woodland. Basically, they act as a nice shelter for trees to get established in amongst. It's almost like a tree cage, a natural tree cage, in that you've got this thorny, tough, unpalatable, scrubby tree that is going to act as a nursery for other trees to grow in.
And would the trees come in naturally?
Yeah, the idea is that we get a seed source established here in the main blocks of woodland, of which there's about 3 or 4, where we've planted a lot of birch, a lot of oak, a lot of hazel. But I think birch will be the winner for getting trees and woodland established on this site, because it's a wind-borne seed, so it gets everywhere. It's like a dandelion of trees. So yeah, we're putting the scrub in place, we're putting the seed source in place, and we'll just take a step back, let the cows do the thing. I'll let my back rest, and hopefully trees will get established on their own. Obviously, you've got to put a lot of work in initially. And you've got to intervene if something's going wrong or if something's not quite going to plan. But I think nature can do a lot of the work for us.
And the heather's coming here too, isn't it?
Yeah, this is the heather regen I was describing. Anne just pointed out a lovely cluster over there that's still just in flower. And you can see it's spreading downhill in places. There's a clump down there in the boggy a bit. Loads of little berries going.
And bilberry.
Yeah, bilberry, yeah.
And that wouldn't stand a chance, would it, if the sheep were around?
No, I think it's quite tasty, I believe, bilberry. Yeah.
So Anne, we've just come to admire the heather that you found.
Yes. Well, it's a complete carpet, and that's all part of where the grazing regime has paid off, because the heather's now had a chance to regenerate. But this has been an absolute beauty. And the lichens have really picked up on the rocks as well. Yeah.
And we're surrounded by galloways.
We are indeed. They're everywhere. Yes, as I say, I'm glad somebody else's job to count them today. I'd be backwards and forwards, like the Grand Old Duke of York. Yeah.
So Jack, it's not just juniper, is it, that you've been planting? It's huge swathes of trees as well, and not totally on your own.
No. Whenever I'm out here planting trees, it's with volunteers. And over the years, volunteers have been involved in planting, as I say, probably about 30,000 trees at this point. In various areas across the site, from main blocks of woodland where we're trying to get an actual woodland established, hopefully, and to scatterings of trees across the site to mimic that randomness of where tree seeds might find themselves and start regenerating. But I'd like to think that volunteers are always going to be involved in some way at this site, because we couldn't have achieved what we've achieved so far without them. We're going on about the cows and how brilliant they are, but the volunteers are even more important. They have such an attachment to the place. Like, I know every inch of this reserve, and so many of the volunteers do, and we have memories on each part of it. I can remember where we were sheltering from the rain over there beyond that rock one day. There's an area where I was sitting when I found out that I've bought a house, and it's the same for all the volunteers.
It works both ways, and everybody I've come across at the Wildlife Trust has been incredibly welcoming and supportive of being a volunteer. Now, that doesn't happen all the time when you're volunteering, but it does here. It does certainly on Eycott, but it does generally with the Trust, and you're appreciated for what you do.
How many volunteers do contribute their time here, Jack? Have you any idea?
God, over the years, God, it'd be hard to count. Hundreds. I mean, when I do my volunteer days, we can get upwards of 10 people come, and I'll do about, we'll do maybe 30 volunteer days a year. So that adds up after 10 years.
So, Jack, you brought me to a different part of the site here, and it's a lot wetter here than the ridges we were just on.
Yeah, so we're in the Valley Myers where peat's formed. There's been historic draining of the site, essentially to try and make it more viable for agriculture, for livestock to graze it. We've reversed that. I mean, as you can see, the cattle are still in amongst the mire. They get on quite happily here. So we haven't made it too wet for the cattle. But yeah, it's basically entailed blocking up historic ditches to slow that flow of water. And what it's done on the site, and what we've tried to encourage as well, is the creation of ponds around these areas where the water is getting stopped. So, actually reversing one thing, which is, the drainage of areas of peat and wetlands on the site, has had another positive impact in that we've got hordes of ponds around the site.
So it's a win-win, Jack, isn't it?
It is a win-win. It's full of, the amount of frog spawn I encounter on this site is unbelievable. I never encounter as much frog spawn anywhere else as I do here. Dragonflies in summer, there's hundreds of them, literally hundreds, probably thousands, because I go around counting them. Like we've got the bog itself with all the sphagnum mosses and the sedges, and then as it gets a little bit drier, we've got other plants that have colonised the slightly less wet areas, such as the grass of Parnassus, which is a county flower. It's a lovely flower.
It's beautiful.
It's really
it's white.
Stands out.
Yeah, it does. It does stand out so clearly in amongst the grass. Yeah.
And then we've also got an interesting plant, Devil's Bit scabious. Yeah, its name originates from the fact that it had a lot of healing properties. So the devil's bit signifies that the devil tried biting off the root to kill the plant, as it had, all of these properties that were beneficial to humans. And when you actually look at the plant, it does have quite a short, stubby root.
And the devil's bit scabious is really important as a food plant as well, isn't it?
Really important. So about 4 or 5 years ago, the marsh fritillary butterfly colonised Eycott Hill, which in itself is quite a big thing, in that because the marsh fritillaries went extinct in Cumbria, I think back in the early 2000s, and then the last caterpillars were taken out of the wild and grew on in a captive environment, and then they started getting released into Cumbria. Eycott Hill they weren't historically at, so they weren't released here. But as I said, 4 or 5 years ago, they colonised the site themselves. So they're clearly, it's a success story in itself. But also the work we've done here in switching up the grazing to allow flowers to thrive across the landscape has provided somewhere for the butterflies to go. A completely new habitat. So they lay their eggs on Devil's Bit scabious, and then the caterpillars consume the scabious and grow on, and they weave a little protective web. So the volunteers are actually out today, and they're doing a web count. So they're going through areas that Michael, our apprentice, has mapped out where Devil's Bit scabious grows, and you all walk in a line and you look for the webs and you do a count. So this year so far we've had 130 webs that we've found. So from finding about a dozen in that first year to 130, 4 or 5 years later, it's pretty good.
It's fantastic, isn't it? And Jack, in terms of other animals and invertebrates that have come in, how are we doing?
I mean, I did, me and Joe did an Eycott Hill article for the magazine a few months ago, and I looked back at the initial invertebrate surveys that were done when we got the site, and then one was done 5 years later. I think it was perhaps 50 to 70 more invertebrate species were recorded on the reserve, which in the space of 5 years, that's pretty good going.
And it's not just invertebrates, is it? It's all of the little mammals that live in grass.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Eycott Hill is a perfect habitat for small mammals because there's just so much vegetation that's allowed to grow, which again has that knock-on effect of what's eating those small mammals. So we were just walking out the boardwalk here and a kestrel was hovering above our heads. That's one bird of prey. Short-eared owls, perhaps hen harriers. We've known those to pass through as well. So there's a whole knock-on effect. So yeah, it's nice to see.
Right, well, what a fantastic interview there from Jack and Anne out on the site. And I think it just gives a real flavour of the success of all the interventions that we've made.
It really is all with a view to attempting to get it to a system whereby it's almost or as close as possible to being self-managing, using those sort of natural processes like grazing.
And the fact is that we're not rewilding, because that's very difficult on an enclosed 200 hectare block of land within this agricultural landscape. But what I like to think of is that we are making the place wilder. It's a wilder place than it was, and we can see the benefits of that.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, even just sort of a small thing like allowing the grass to grow immediately increased the number of small mammals, voles and mice in particular. And, as a result of that, we began to see more and more owls around the place. So simply removing the pressure from nature and wildlife, removing that agricultural pressure to whatever degree, makes a huge difference initially. And then it is around about sort of tickling around the edges. But we're very much hoping to see a system, as I say, that's sort of, so far as is possible, self-managing.
I mean, there must have been, 10 or 15,000 trees and shrubs planted on there. And we were just saying before recording how it still feels like a treeless environment. You kind of have to search them out, don't you? And hopefully, like you say, when we've got a seed source established, with the cattle grazing, we'll get natural regeneration, and the trees will find their own place. The trees and shrubs will find their own way. It gives a flavour of the success of some of that tree planting.
Well, it has been phenomenal, and it is entirely down to the sterling efforts of our volunteers over the past 10 years, because basically we've all gone out and weeded the tree tubes, individually, each and every tree, which is, the success rate is above 90%, which I think in general terms in tree planting is just quite spectacular. But it's amazing how many trees you can lose in 200 hectares.
And in a way, this is a great template, and it's been a great kind of laboratory experiment of what we might be able to do in our new reserve at Skiddaw Forest.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the ideal model. I mean, Skiddaw Forest is at a whole different nature of scale. 3,000 acres compared to Eycott Hill, which is 400 and something acres. But absolutely, it provides the template. Plant it, keep planting it, repair things, repair ditches, repair the grips, restore the peat, bring back the species that are missing to form the habitat, and give things that kick start. Skiddaw will be really exciting because, as I say, it is at such a scale.
The big difference being that is the summit of Eycott is considerably lower than the lowest point in Skiddaw Forest. So we are talking, even though we're talking very similar habitats in terms of heathland, grassland and the woodland that we hope to establish, it's just going to be a kind of monumental task on Skiddaw in terms of timescale. It's going to take a long, long time to establish those trees.
It's just a long-term, more than a lifetime project.
Yeah, just such a pity that I'm so old. And that I'm just not going to see the success of it, but I have faith that it's all going to be done once I've gone. I'm also very aware, Kevin, that one of the outcomes that we always wanted for Eycott was to try to prove that there is a place where agriculture and farming and nature reserve management can come together and be as one. And do you think that Eycott's fulfilled that?
Yes, I think it has actually. I think it has been important as a demonstration that farming and wildlife are not mutually exclusive. They can both exist alongside each other. And that actually, the model of farming that takes place in many of our marginal areas, particularly in the uplands, is just simply not economically viable, and it follows a model, which is relatively modern, using continental cattle and sheep, and the costs associated with that model are prohibitive, and and rather than just going down the sort of continental route, we can use native breed cattle in lower numbers, but it still provides an absolutely premium food product.
No, I totally agree, and that the low input, low output, the agri-environment subsidy for doing environmental good is obviously a big part of this, and I think it's much better for the farmer. It's a much more laid back and a much easier way of farming, much less stressful compared to somebody who's milking twice a day, cutting silage, putting all these fertilizer on and all the rest of it. There's a lot of hard work and a lot of stress involved in that. And this is and expense obviously, and this is a much slower form of farming. Yeah, brilliant. That's excellent. Thank you, Kevin. Right, I think that was ace. I think we've learned a lot about Eycott Hill there and the history and what's gone on over the last 10 years. Just like to say, we're not going to be doing a podcast in October. It is coming back in November with a special all about what's been happening on and around Skidder Forest. So I hope you look forward to and keep your ears out for the November podcast, and we shall speak to you then. I'd like to say a massive thanks to Kevin.
It's been enjoyable, thank you.
Massive thanks to Jack and Anne, and once again, thanks to Liz for putting all this together and doing the interviews. Yeah, so keep your ears out for the podcast, and we'll talk to you again in November.